Varanasi is a city of overwhelming density. When a student named Swara arrived there for college, she looked at the chaotic, congested streets and immediately decided she needed an escape. She found a newly built hostel in a quieter neighborhood, hoping for some peace. The arrangement seemed ideal. Swara had a room entirely to herself on the top floor, while the property owners and their family lived directly below on the ground floor. Having a family downstairs gave her a comforting, albeit false, sense of security. She quickly settled into a rigorous daily routine. She listened to spiritual hymns, attended her daily classes, and walked in the evenings. Every Thursday was strictly reserved for visits to the Tulsi Manas temple. It was her first time living independently, and she thrived on this structure. This disciplined routine created an invisible barrier. Between her daily temple visits and her structured solitude, Swara had built a mental environment that, at least initially, was impenetrable to the house's history. A month later, Swara and 3 other girls gathered in an empty upstairs room to watch a horror movie. Partway through, Swara decided to go to sleep, but instead of leaving, she slipped under the bed, waited for a tense moment in the film, and crawled out to scare her friends. The joke landed perfectly, but the next morning, her friends were pale and exhausted. They demanded to know why Swara had returned in the middle of the night to call their names from outside their open window. Swara was confused. After that first scare, she had gone straight to her room and slept. Assuming the girls were trying to pull a retaliatory prank, Swara walked out onto the rooftop that evening. She laughed, looked into the empty air, and called out. She told whoever, or whatever, had frightened them that she felt left out, and she wanted to experience its presence too. Paranormal researchers often describe a haunting as a two-way street. A spirit can exist in a house for years without interaction, but the moment a human explicitly asks for its presence, that passive echo gains a target. Swara hadn't just spoken to the air, she had signaled that she was a willing participant. The response to her challenge was almost immediate. That night, unable to sleep, Swara stepped into the corridor heading for the bathroom. Before she could open the door, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy, disembodied breathing, a sound that was slowly moving closer to her. She ran back to her room, only to see 2 disembodied legs standing in the gap beneath her balcony curtain. Next night, frozen in the dark, a voice drifted from the empty bed, whispering that it had simply come to be her friend. The phenomenon quickly infected the rest of the hostel. The 2 older girls packed their bags and moved out within days. Meanwhile, Swara's younger roommate, Shraddha, began collapsing from violent daytime illness and hallucinating shadowy figures in broad daylight. The entity was no longer a residual haunt passively attached to the building's architecture. Swara's verbal invitation had given it a focus, transforming it into an active predator hunting the specific person who called out to it. Desperate for answers, Swara approached a young man living in the house directly adjacent to the hostel's roof. Promising to keep his identity secret, she asked if he knew anything unusual about the property. The neighbor explained that before the recent renovations, the building was a boys' hostel. After a young student committed suicide inside, the current owners quickly leased the property, rushed through some cosmetic construction, and rebranded it to hide the tragedy. The progression of a haunting follows a predictable path. A trauma-based entity usually starts in a dormant state, isolated by the indifference of the people around it. But once an invitation is issued, that distance vanishes, resulting in a direct, personal attachment. In this shift towards supernatural attachment, the entity's goal becomes clear. It was no longer scaring her away, it was claiming her. Swara's challenge gave the spirit a sense of belonging, and it intended to make that connection permanent. A location's tragic history is often just a quiet, residual echo. It requires human interaction, a reckless challenge, or a casual invitation to weaponize that trauma into a lethal, active threat. As Swara's physical and mental health rapidly deteriorated, the entity began actively isolating her. When she finally broke down in tears and picked up her phone to call her father for help, the screen violently glitched, dropping the signal. Rather than panicking, Swara became furious. She threw her phone and screamed into the empty room. She declared that she knew exactly who he was and how he died, promising that she would leave the hostel and expose his secret so no one else would ever stay there. The next morning, she managed to reach her father. A spiritually sensitive man, he immediately recognized the severity of her situation. He sensed the ghost's lethal intent pressing in on his daughter and ordered her to evacuate the property that very day. Swara woke Shraddha, and the two rapidly packed whatever they could carry. As they headed for the door, the hostel owners furiously demanded they stay, accusing them of ruining their business. The Ghos ignored the threats entirely and walked out. When trapped in a spiritual siege, hesitation is a vulnerability. Swara's direct, fearless confrontation, paired with an absolute, unwavering resolve to physically leave the space, successfully severed the supernatural attachment. With its chosen target gone, the frustrated entity redirected its anger toward the people who covered up its death. Mid-argument, the hostel owner completely lost his voice, while his son began suffering agonizing, crushing pain in his head whenever he was alone. The family was completely overwhelmed by the violent activity. Within days of Swara's departure, the owners were forced to permanently shut down the newly renovated property and abandon the building entirely. A local priest brought in by the family later confirmed the mechanics of the haunting. The spirit had been mostly harmless, lost in its own despair, right up until Swara's rooftop challenge gave it a profound, dangerous sense of belonging. The priest's final assessment was grim. The spirit intended to keep Swara there permanently. While her morning hymns and temple visits had provided an initial layer of resistance, it was her final act of defiance, declaring her intent to leave and exposing the secret, that ultimately broke the entity's hold. Tragedies leave scars on the places they occur, but those psychic imprints are inherently passive. It is our own reckless actions and casual invitations that empower them to become